we want to then do is we want to connect this idea of restricted values, the restricted value for x here, and on the red graph we got a hole, and restricted value on the blue graph we got a vertical asymptote. So we wanted to connect restricted values to either a hole or a vertical asymptote. So how do we determine if it's a hole or if it's a vertical asymptote? Okay, so those are our options. So how do we determine when it's one versus the other? So to determine whether something is a hole or an asymptote, we use this criteria. So in this case here, if we take a look at this f of x graph, there's a hole at x equals -3 from this function, and there's a restriction x plus 3, and we have a vertical asymptote at x equals 2. So there's a restriction x minus 2. What's the difference between these two? So when we look at the difference between these two, one factor cancels out, the other factor doesn't. So since when we have factors that don't cancel, there is a vertical asymptote. If the factors cancel, as in this case here, we end up with a hole. Okay, so basically this has no effect on the y value, but it does produce a hole there. Whereas here we actually end up dividing by 0. As we get close to 0, we're going to end up dividing by 0, so it's going to go shooting off to infinity and negative infinity down here. So the restrictions are important. We have to understand that there are restrictive values. The restrictive values in the denominator give us two possibilities, and those two possibilities are canceling, you get a hole. When they don't cancel, you get a vertical asymptote. Now, I put a special note on here on calculators, on graphing calculators. The vertical line sometimes is drawn in and sometimes not, but it's important to understand that that vertical line is actually not part of the graph. Okay? That line is an imaginary line that doesn't exist, that the values approach. Okay? So that if you ever see that line drawn on the graph, please don't draw that on your graphs. You know, I see sometimes people draw these things because that's what it looks like on your calculator. That vertical line is actually not part of the graph. If you're going to draw it in, it needs to be drawn in properly as an asymptote.